Well, we've got everything that we need to make the table. So, got my temperature gauge. Got to keep the humidity and temperature at a certain level for the epoxy to cure well. In addition to that, I've got to make sure that I can add the black tint to it, which is the eye candy black tint that you see there. I've got my paddle stick that I can attach to my drill to mix it in. I've got my tuck tape to make sure the mold releases from the epoxy in the table, or that's going to be a problem. The silicone to make sure that the epoxy doesn't leak out of the mold and that everything is sealed up nice and tight so that the epoxy stays where it should be. I've got the power outlet that Sarah wants. You can see my tape measure and the wood in the background. So I think I've got everything I need, including a speed square to make sure the mold is square and that the olive wood is square. And most importantly, I got to stay hydrated, so I have my tankard with the sawdust claiming it's man glitter. So let's get to it. First thing we need to do is make the molds. So I'm cutting some MDF. I have it put up on foam core so that I don't have to worry about where my saw goes. I'm using a track saw attachment so I can make sure that the edges are nice and straight and even compared to the rest of it. So once that's done, now I can start taking all the pieces and putting the tuck tape on each of the MDF pieces that I've cut. Now this is important to do because I don't want the the epoxy to stick to the wood, and that tape prevents that from happening. So I have to tape up every single piece of wood, making sure that it's covered, making sure that the seams are nice and tight, and that it wraps around the edges so that if it really does leak, it's not going to stick to that wood. If it sticks to the wood, the project would be ruined. So I have to really be careful and make sure I do that. I have to not only do the sides and make sure that they're all done, but I also have to make sure that I do the bottom. And so I have to take tape and go across every single inch of that base of the form. Once that's done, now I can start putting it together. And you see where I put some caulk around the edge, and I'm using square clamps to hold it in place and make sure that it's square. I kind of messed up there. Some of that caulk ran. I'll reseal that in a little bit. But each of those pieces need to be held in. They need to be square to make sure that it's right. And then I take my nail gun and I just pin nail them together so that it'll hold. Once I've done that, I can go on and do the rest of them. So here's what that looks like all put together. The last thing I need to do is make sure it's square, which of course it is. And now I'm going to take some caulk and I'm going to run it around the edges, both on the bottom and the sides in the corners to make sure that it won't leak. So that's all done. Now I can let that dry out for a little bit, and then we're going to get ready to pour. So the first thing I got to do, though, is make sure that I'm cutting the olive wood to the size that we want it. So we want the table to be around 26 inches, so I'm going to cut the olive wood to 27. That gives me a little bit of room to do some trimming, as well as there could be some epoxy that runs over the edge, and I want to make sure I can trim that off. So the first one was pretty easy. I had a nice straight edge to work with. This one was a little bit more tricky because I don't have necessarily a straight edge all the way down. So I'm going to have to clamp that piece in there, hold it tight as I move my fence across the saw blade. If I can do that, it should make a nice straight cut. One of the things that I did notice, though, is that overall one of the pieces of olive wood was warped. I'm going to keep those leftovers because I'm going to make splines with the leftover pieces. And so with that, I can get ready to do the pour, but I'm going to do that when we get back from the owner's meeting. And I think we'll have to wait on that. So it's all ready to go. You can see the pieces are squared up. Now it's time to mix some epoxy. So I've got a big measuring jug there, and epoxy is a 2-to-1 ratio. So there's 2 parts to it that I need to use to get it done. You can see I have the pieces all clamped in, ready to go. I put some caulk around the places where I might want it to overflow just to keep the epoxy in place. Turns out I really didn't need to do that. So I have my cup, or measuring cup. It's huge. I think it's supports like 32 cups or something like that. Since it's 2-to-1, I had to do a little bit of math, which we know is kind of hard for me. So there's the epoxy, and then here's the hardener. So I need 2 parts epoxy to 1 part hardener. And you have to make sure it mixes up really, really well. So I pour the epoxy into the cup, take a look at it. Looks like I got it close. Pour the hardener in, and that looks like it's really good. Now mix. This went on for about 10 minutes. Aren't you glad I didn't show the full 10 minutes? Now I'm adding the eye candy black powder to it, and off we go again. Do a bunch of mixing to make sure that is mixed in well. Make sure the epoxy and the hardener are well mixed together. Trying to scrape some of that off the side with the paddle that I have on my drill. And it looks like it's getting pretty good. So I think we're going to get ready to do the pour here. I know I have the room temperature set pretty good. And this pour takes quite a while. So we did the pour. You can see, believe it or not, that is all liquid in there right now. I need that to set up for about 2 to 3 days before I can remove the mold. That's what I've done here. I removed the mold. It worked out great. It popped right off. You can see it's kind of a mess, but man, does that look good on top. Now we're going to have to take it to the shop and get it planed. Man, was this a time saver. He planes it out really nice. What a great guy. What a great machine. And as you can see, he pushes it through, and we ran it through probably 3 or 4 times. And every time he ran it through, he would take and he would dust it off a little bit just to see how it was doing, making sure that it was flat on both sides. And I think this cost me $80 maybe, but it just saves so much time. I don't quite know how I would have flattened it out if it wasn't for that. So once that's done planing, here's what it looks like. It's roughed up now. It's not very shiny, but the wood looks good. Everything looks great on it. And now it's going to time to sand. So here's what I've got set up for sanding. I've got about 8 variations of grit. I start with the 80, I go to 120, then 180, then 240, then 320, then 400. Then I actually went to 600, 800, and 1,000. And so you can kind of see where I started, and then you can kind of see how it blends in, and you have to really make sure you're getting that sanded down well. Once that's halfway decent, then I can start working on the legs and the frame. So I'm making the frame here, making it out of poplar. I'm going to paint that black and then install the power cord so we know what that's going to look like. So I want the frame to be fairly tight around the legs. Not so tight that you can't, adjust the legs or anything, but at least tight enough. I'm going to try to bevel the edges a little bit, so I bought a special router bit for that. We'll see how that works. It's supposed to make sure that those edges are nice and tight and clean. Once I had it put together, I thought, I'd really like to make sure those edges are good, so I'm making splines. And remember that olive wood that I saved? That's what I'm making the splines out of. I had to make a jig that I could fit it into and then run it across the router. The router has got a 1/4 inch bit in it, and what it'll do is it'll cut those grooves into that. So I sat down at my router table, and then I ran it through, and you can see the spline opening that it made. I flipped that back over, and now I can run it around from the other side. I tried to measure so that it's a third, a third, a third when those splines are cut. Here's what it looks like before I really start sanding now, and here's what it looks like when I'm done sanding. And I think that turned out pretty doggone good. It looks really good. I had to put my own handiwork on it, so I bought that. Now I got to attach the table legs. So I'm using inserts and versus just screwing it in. The inserts are a little bit more stable. They create a better bond, and you don't have to worry about the wood splitting. So the first thing I got to do is drill them into a certain depth. That's why I have the tape on the drill. I know how deep to drill. Once I have that done, then I can put the insert in and put the legs on. So the legs here are attached. We're all ready to go. And I've been painting the frame, and so that's all painted, and that's the end product. The frame is on. Well, I should say we're going to put the frame on. We're going to use pocket holes to do that. So if you look underneath, you can probably see those. This is a pocket hole jig. It's super helpful, and it just helps me line up where I need to do the screws. And I set the depth on it, and you can see how it makes a little hole there that I can use and then drill it in. So once I have that done, I'm going to put some glue around the outside of it all together, and that'll just provide some extra strength to it so that it's not just the screws. I have pocket holes drilled on 2 sides, and I did 3 on each side. So with the glue and the pocket holes, that should hold that pretty good. It should be pretty stable and pretty strong. So now I'm going to lift that up and just drop it onto place it onto the table. I want to hold that down, so I'm going to try to use some clamps, but gosh, look at that. The clamp doesn't work. But you know what? Not to be deterred, I'm going to try another clamp. That one didn't work either. Oh, how about another one? Nope, that one didn't work. Boy, you'd think I'd get smart and try to figure something out. Oh, I got a clamp. I bet this one will work. Yeah, it didn't. So now, after a couple tries, I'm going to get smart. I'm going to lay a piece of wood across that and then clamp that down. I just want that nice and secure when I drill the screws in for the pocket holes. So I clamp it down on that side, I can clamp it down on this side. I'm using that wood to kind of span the length to make sure that holds. You can see where the glue's leaked out a little bit. I'll clean that up in just a little bit. And now it's time to screw the frame into the tabletop using those pocket screws. So as I do that, you notice that I still haven't put the charging station in yet. That'll be one of the last things I do when I'm done with this. So I've got that all done. It's secure. Putting in the last couple of screws for the pocket in the pocket holes. And now it's time to put the charger in. So I'll run the wire through there. I'll press it in. I made it a little bit tight. I didn't want any kind of, wiggle room. So I'm going to tap it in there just to make sure that it's nice and secure. And now I'm going to wipe that glue away. There's a couple other spots. I'm going to tie that cord up to the table leg. I just didn't want it to be moving around. So there it is, completed. You can see the splines. I think those turned out pretty good. And you can see it after it's all polished up. I really had fun making it. I hope you enjoy it for a lifetime. Let me know if you need anything else built.